years ago, I was sitting across from a young student in a school counseling room. He was bright, articulate, well behaved. He was everything that a student looks fine on the paper. And yet, I had a very simple question for him. What's been weighing on you lately? After long silence, he said something I have never forgotten. He said, I don't know why I'm doing all this anymore. He didn't say, I don't have friends. He didn't say, I feel lonely. But he said, I don't know why any of this matters, without a pause. I left that room unsettled with that question. Because I had all the tools to help him regulate. I had all the tools to help him emotionally, psychologically. I knew his symptoms. I could identify them. I could give him the coping strategies, reduce his distress even. But sometimes, something just stopped me cold there. He wasn't describing a disorder. He was describing a disconnection. And I didn't really have the map for that. That boy is not alone. You see, we are living in a time where something has truly, truly shifted. We are living in a generation where there's a lot of language for inner life than any generation before us. Trauma, burnout, anxiety, attachment, words that didn't exist in the public conversations a generation ago has now become part of everyday vocabulary. And yet, loneliness keeps rising, depression keeps rising. The World Health Organization estimates hundreds of millions of lot of people suffering from difficulties like that of depression, anxiety, and many others. Researcher Anne Case has documented what they call as deaths of despair. People dying not from illness, but by the slow erosion of meaning and belonging. But beyond diagnosable conditions, there is a quieter and a more unnamed crisis that we're all seeing. People who are functioning, achieving, even succeeding, and yet asking a question saying, why do I feel empty when everything looks fine? Why does life feel flat even when nothing is technically wrong? Why do I still feel disconnected from myself? And I don't think these are small questions. I think these are deeply human questions. Because this is not only a mental health crisis, I believe it is increasingly a disorder or a crisis of becoming. A crisis of not only what people feel, but of who they are and what they are becoming. And if that feels meaningful at all. Now, this one question that I left the counseling room with changed the entire trajectory of my personal and professional life. Because that boy there was not the only one, and we all know that, don't we? Across 11 years of practice, thousands of hours, sitting with thousands of patients in rooms like that of a hospital, in clinical setups, in school counseling rooms, this question repeats again and again. From adolescents to professionals to parents, from people who are even in every external measure have everything on record on paper. And yet they still feel asking, what am I missing? And that's what made me think, what if modern psychology, for all its extraordinary contribution, has been working with an incomplete picture of the human being? Now, I want to be really careful here, right? I'm not here standing and critiquing modern psychology in its entirety. I do understand its extraordinary contributions in trauma, in cognition, in neurobiology, in emotion regulation. All of this is extraordinary. But a harder question that keeps emerging from the field in itself, from the researchers, from the clinicians, from the field, is that what if symptom reduction alone is not what the full picture of a human being is? The question took me on a journey across 2 countries into rooms full of people asking the same questions. The first was Cambridge Muslim College. The conversations there were slow, patient, unhurried, I remember. Scholars and clinicians sitting together in those quiet backyards, not rushing into a diagnosis, not reaching for a tool even, asking not what is wrong with the human being, but what is the human being capable of becoming through trials and through tribulations. Now, what those rooms gave me was the understanding that before we talk about a psychologist and a client as roles, these are two human beings coming together at a very deeply vulnerable encounter. And that healing does not happen only through technique, it happens through presence, the quality of your attention, through the depth of the stillness, the capacity to sit fully with another person's suffering without rushing through it. And then the following year, Istanbul happened. Another beautiful institute called Khalil Center, where literally Asia meets Europe, at the edge of Bosphorus, a clinical institution that integrates spirituality into practice, where psychologists and psychiatrists from around the world were gathered again, doing something I had not quite seen before, insisting that you cannot really help a human being become whole if you only treat their parts. And that is something worth sitting with. That's some of the most searching conversations that I had about the future of mental health, ironically happened inside walls that were 470 years old in the Suleymaniye complex of Istanbul. As if the building itself was asking and reminding us that these questions are not new. Human beings have always needed more than coping. So let me offer you what my journey, what my search, and all the years of practice in these courses and sitting in these conversations taught me. This map comes from Khalil Center's model of the integrated psychotherapy known as TIIP. People come and people are carrying different things, right? So this study made us realize that they are carrying anxiety, depression, trauma, a sense of something that was broken inside them, which a lot of human beings have these experiences. So what was different was how they were treated in this study. Not just the thinking, not just the feeling, but the whole person. All 4 dimensions which was captured, and the results were published in a peer-reviewed American Psychological Association journal, which showed significant reductions in psychological distress. And another beautiful study, a broader meta-analysis, also shows 97 studies, 7,000 patients, very similar results. When therapy treats the whole of the person, outcomes are consistently stronger. People don't just need their symptoms to be treated or fixed, they need to be seen as a whole person. And at the center of that model is a very simple but a very powerful claim. We are not simply a mind that thinks, a nervous system that functions, but we are at least 4 things at the same time, right? The thinking self, the capacity to reason, reflect, understand, the part that makes a lot of sense about the world. The feeling self, right? The heart, the part that carries memory, grief, longing, and this is the part that is usually moved by something. The becoming self, which is shaped by our behavioral inclinations, our habits, our patterns, each of it which repeatedly done gradually makes us who we are. It is constantly being written by the way we live. And last but not the least is the soul, the part that reaches beyond the immediate and measurable. The part that asks, why? The part that seeks meaning and not just relief. This dimension, across every tradition, named or unnamed, has been recognized as what makes us distinctly and irreducibly human. What both places gave me in different languages, through different doors, through different conversations, was the same thing said twice. Modern psychology is extraordinarily good at the surface layers of the human being, but there are depths it does not yet have a language for. And until we find that language, until we find those depths seriously, we will keep producing people who are functional but not whole. Across centuries and continents, human beings have been drawing versions of the same map. Aristotle called it the nous, right? The part of us that teaches us and makes us reach towards meaning and truth. Viktor Frankl called it the noetic dimension, the part that cannot be explained by brain chemistry or childhood wounds, the part that holds the why. Positive psychology calls it the transcendence, as a core human virtue and not philosophy. An empirical search, it's not philosophy. Buddhist psychologists have observed this for centuries and years, that suffering deepens when we ignore the soul. Different languages, different cultures, different centuries, different continents, same insistence. Same insistence. That not all of them said identical things, but that across every serious tradition of human self-understanding, East and the West, modern and ancient, the same intuition keeps surfacing. That we are more than our biology, more than our emotions, more than our thoughts. And that when we forget, something essential goes missing. Now from Istanbul, let me take you to Vienna, in Austria, Central Europe. There was a psychiatrist called Viktor Frankl. He came up in the world of Freud and Adler. We all know the giants, the Freud and the Adler. He was corresponding with Freud through letters as a teenager, attending Adler's seminars even. He was not working in the vacuum. He very well knew all the dominant frameworks of his time. But he broke from both of them. Why? Because Freud said the deepest human drive was pleasure. And what did Adler say? The deepest human drive was power. And Viktor Frankl felt, they both have reduced the human being down to something too little and simple. Because life, he believed, is not primarily a quest for pleasure, nor a quest for power. It's a quest for meaning, for purpose. He had a practice, a family, a theory he had been developing in the name of logotherapy, which means the therapy of meaning. Then the Nazis came, and everything he had was taken. In the concentration camps, he watched not just his own suffering, but everyone who remained inside themselves, intact. And what he found was something very interesting. The prisoners who endured best and survived were not the ones who were very physically fit or strongest. They were not the ones who were really courageous, but the ones who had the why. A child that they've been holding on to meet, a love that is not yet expressed, a purpose that is not yet fulfilled. Right? They had the why. Now let us apply this map to the next. So if you see, what Frankl witnessed was that the thinking self was under assault. The feeling self submerged. Of course, in the concentration camps, what emotions can you have? The becoming self was stripped, dehumanized, and reduced to a mere number. But the soul, the part that holds the why, that could not have been taken by force. Because Frankl survived, and his conclusion was, he who has a why to bear can live almost anyhow. He who has a why can live almost anyhow. Now let's come back to the boy. What about his thinking self? His thinking self was way too fine. His feeling self was very regulated. Like I said, he was perfect on the paper. His becoming self, no ruptures, no behavioral disorders or anything that could actually make us feel something is not okay. But what about his soul? That wasn't addressed, right? That wasn't addressed, which was completely unaddressed. Not by the school, not by the psychology, not by any system around him. Frankl's prisoners had almost nothing. And that boy, if you see, he had almost everything. And yet they were both seeking the same question. Why does any of this matter? The difference was that Frankl's prisoners had been forced to find an answer, while this boy had never been asked to look for one. I do sometimes go back to that counseling room, to that boy who said, I don't know if any of this matters. And I think about how many people in this room, as adults, as adolescents, as professionals, as parents, all of us might be at some point asking this in silence. Not that I'm broken, I am functioning, right? But still feel lost anyway. So what that boy needed, or what I believe many of us need, was not only a framework for coping. He needed a framework for becoming. He needed something to sit with him and ask, what do you value? What gives your life meaning? What gives your life the direction? What kind of a person do you want to be? Not just what do you want to achieve. What is the difference between surviving this moment and genuinely living it? Frankel's prisoners, at their very worst, had one thing we sometimes forget to offer, even at our very best: permission to ask the why. And yet we have built entire systems upon systems, to remove what is wrong. We help people manage anxiety, regulate anger, reduce the distress, but we have almost nothing to help people cultivate what is possible. To build courage, to develop patience, to nourish the soul, to help them not just feel better, but become more whole. The work is to change what you are becoming. That is the depth that is missing. So when we speak about this, especially about evolution today, this is what I want us all to leave the room with. Perhaps the next great evolution is not technological. Perhaps it's not even emotional, because we all believe it should. Perhaps the next best evolution, what we most urgently need, is something which is inward. An evolution of character, of meaning, of wisdom, of purpose, and feeling all of this together in one dimension, but becoming what is shaped with the inclination of choice and the part that asks not just the why, but also the how. The parts that ask the meaning, not just the relief. The parts that long to become and not merely just function in the world. Because perhaps the deepest crisis for our time is not that people are broken. It is that we have taught them how to function without teaching them how to become whole. And maybe, just maybe, the question worth carrying today out of this room is not about how do I cope or function better, but rather who am I in the process of becoming. Thank you.